All right, welcome. We're live. It is Wednesday, May 26th. Digital Roundtable is on. The team is ready to roll. Lots of stuff to talk about. We have a great guest. Can't wait to hear our conversation with our old friend, Mike Bates. Let me say hi to Dr. Sibley Butler. John, do we have a guitar? Can you take us to some music?
You know, let's do something nice. Operator, why don't you help me place this call? You see the number on the matchbook is old and faded.
Excellent. How you doing? Excellent, John. Hi, Johnny, how are you today?
I'm fine. I did CNBC yesterday on disruptive technologies, looking at the new business models that would change how we live in America. And most of them were in the billion-dollar ranges. They are being launched. We don't know much about them yet, but certainly it was interesting to appear on CNBC to talk about what I call the cosmic future. You know, when it comes
I got a bunch of notes actually, and we're gonna circle back and talk about some of those. Very interesting. Let me go to Llewelyn. Llewelyn, sir, how are you?
Well, thank you. All is well here in East Texas. We're not actually here allowed to carry concealed weapons, but I'm glad you are.
Yeah, I just found out that I can actually carry my entire arsenal of 20 weapons with myself and not have any problems. This is awesome. Let me say hi to our guest, Mike Bates. Mike, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine.
Great. I think we're having a little bit of the
Fantastic, Andres. How you doing?
Yeah, great, awesome. I'm glad that you're here, Mike.
Okay.
Let me introduce Mike for our audience. Mike is the general manager of energy at Intel Corporation, and as such, he is responsible for delivering leadership messaging and setting strategic directions for accounts across the energy sector globally. Intel Corporation, as you probably should know and probably know, is the largest semiconductor company in the world. And prior to Intel, Mike was a general manager at several companies, including Energy Hub. He was an executive at IBM, and he also was an executive of a company called Insenergy, and actually a company where I met Mike back in 2003 in my office, where he was running an outfit called GridPoint. Oh, memories, wow.
They're still around.
But we're not gonna hold anything against Mike, John Butler, because he's actually a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Texas A&M University. And he also sits on the board of directors of the Prime Alliance and the Gridwise Alliance. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Andres, and I apologize in advance if I'm having some internet issues, but hopefully we'll hang in there through the.
No worries. These things do happen from time to time. We will smooth that out. No worries. So let me switch real quick to where we are. Every week we review what's going on in the world, and vaccinations are up to 288 million as of this morning. We're roughly vaccinating now about 11 million people a week. So the number is coming down. The number of folks that want to get vaccinated is diminishing dramatically. I think there's a significant number of folks per their First Amendment rights to don't want to take the vaccination. So we're probably close to being done here pretty soon, in a week or two, having vaccinated all those that want it. And I know that my entire family is vaccinated. All this has created a bit of a, sort of a feeling of, stability, perhaps somewhat optimism that things may come back to a near future. I hear all kinds of lifts of sanctions and traveling and guidelines for, COVID guidelines. in the August timeframe, things like the world looks like it's coming back, and a lot of shows that used to be online are moving to face-to-face, and you know, the stock market seems to reflect some of that. Johnny, what's your take on where we are today, and really quick?
Well, I think it's very, very interesting. Llewelyn, in his sophisticated Northeastern analysis, said that, you know, we would be strapping guns on. You know, I'm a Vietnam veteran with a Bronze Star for combatant valor, that I might add. But I do have some concerns about our gun stuff. Mainly that even in war, it's the accidents that hurt you. Sit down and your gun go off, and etc. So in terms of the COVID, I think that we're adjusting, some with masks and others without masks. There's, of course, a conflict between what we should do based on our leaders. But I think people have chosen to do certain kinds of things with the mask. On the economy, you know, the economy itself is creeping back. And I measure crudely, like the number of trucks that I see moving around, the number of people who own I-35, the number of people who are returning, wanting, you know, return to the university. But we are not there. What we really don't know is what we've discussed so well on this program are the business models that will change. And we should really do something about a safety net for the gig economy, where they pay into a safety net. But I see hotels coming back. I think restaurants will change. Here in Austin, the big deal is, okay, you know, I cannot afford my apartment anymore. As a matter of fact, I'm selling my house and I'm moving on now because I can get so much money for it. So it's going to be some things that tend to change. On the innovation side, I have looked at so many disruptive innovations here in Austin, Texas. One the other day, I had lunch very quickly, where if you want to get rid of Google, you can get rid of Google. That is, they're doing the code, so the average person can do the code. So very quickly, it is a mixed kind of thing when it comes to the economy, and the gun law would change a lot of stuff. You have to be very, very careful now. As we say in Louisiana, the great state of Louisiana, an armed society is a polite society. So we would have to see what happened.
There you go. Llewelyn, what's your take? Where are we? Are things getting better? Where are we?
I think that we're sort of just on the cusp, and we're not quite sure where it's going to go. I've been traveling a little bit. I've been in Washington and Philadelphia, before that Texas, not Texas, I beg your pardon, Florida. Florida is totally open. There's no sense that there's a pandemic. Washington is still remarkably closed. Philadelphia, likewise. Providence, the same way. So gradually, these cities are loosening up. The first tranche of change is the restaurants are open, and people are flooding to them. People like restaurants. People need them and have missed them. They're destinations. They're places of celebration. They're a social hub. And that's quite important, because when the restaurants are open, people feel better. People feel better when they've got a little luxury they can buy in the form of a meal out with their friends. A sense of normality is attached to restaurants, which was sadly lacking. I don't think most people are going to go back to work in the way that they worked before. I think offices will be important to people, but they won't be in them every day routinely. They've seen another way. They've been taken up the mountain and seen the valley, and the valley is working at home part of the time, depending largely on the nature of the work. I think the office, though, is going to go, or the workplace, which would be a better way to express it, the workplace is going to continue to be important because of the natural quick flow of ideas in a workplace, whereas ideas are somewhat squeezed out of us if they have to come over Zoom or by telephone, by email. But we are just at the beginning. It's the beginning of summer, and with that comes a great expectation. Summer belongs uniquely, in my view, to North America. North Americans enjoy and celebrate summer in a way that no other country I have ever lived in, I've lived in Africa and in Europe, quite gets this almost religious sense of the sanctity of summer as being uniquely, especially a North American province.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Mike, you of all of us are probably the most world traveler. I know that you go to all kinds of places like India and Japan and China and Australia and all over. And so you have a different perspective. Give us a sense. You don't come, so we're lucky to have you, but give us a sense of the sort of the progression 12 months ago to now. What did COVID do? Are there any lessons learned? Is Intel learn anything new from COVID? I mean, a global company has been using remote access and WebEx and all these things forever. And anything new that COVID has done to the business? Anything that is going on in the energy and your customers that you can share?
Well, I think for Intel as a corporation, as you might imagine, with the move to working from home and the move from schooling from home, drove a high demand for home networking and home compute solutions, which was, a benefit for Intel, of course. I think when you think about it from the energy perspective, it's not that COVID caused the transformation that we're seeing in the energy, but because I think the transformation was already underway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we see COVID has expedited a lot of that. And it's not when do we go back to normal, it's what's the new normal look to be. So I think pre-COVID, it was maybe thought of as an evolution in this transformation. I think COVID made it a revolution. I think the supply chain on oil and gas was exposed through COVID. I think the food supply chain was exposed during COVID. I think both those are two industries that are going through rapid transformation in response to the impacts. And I think also in the oil and gas space, we see in companies like Shell, BP make massive declarations about cuts in production, up to 40 to 50% cuts in production. That's a massive transfer of value. Imagine what that means if they're going to leave that much oil in the ground. Again, it was all moving before, but COVID is expediting it in ways that I think are going to move this market into areas that maybe you and I talked about 20 years ago.
Right.
I do think we're at the tipping point now, and COVID is. We'll look back and see that was one of the reasons why.
Yeah. It also seems to me, Mike, and we'll talk about some of these disruptive companies in early stage, but it seems to me that the utility space, water, power, and gas, the smart city space, home buildings, there seems to be an incredible rush to digitalization, right? And a lot of us kind of live in that world every day. Anything to share about new kinds of companies, new partnerships that are, announced that you can say, wow, this, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, these guys were not even trying, and now they're full-fledged invested with us?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the big oil and gas companies. So I think in the area in particular, I see that's changing the quickest is around sustainability. Mm-hmm. So Intel, every account team we have has customers that have C-suite challenges around sustainability. And these are companies that don't have a big sustainability practice and didn't necessarily have a big sustainability practice a year ago. But today, they're all scrambling to build in sustainability into their business model, not just energy sustainability, but sustainability around waste, sustainability around their supply chain. I think that is the area. I think some of the new players in the area again are the oil and gas companies that are getting into the service model, where our company like NLX or Engie going in and doing big long-term power purchase agreements, where they're going in and deploying a lot of clean energy, resilient energy systems on site, owning and operating that asset over a 20-year period of time, and then in turn selling the service to the buyer. I think that's a business model you're going to start to see catch on, and we're starting to see catch on. We're also seeing every day big companies coming to us with a sustainability challenge and looking for support to drive not just the solutions, but best practices. Given that Intel is a leader in this space, we're a big manufacturing company with as small a footprint as we possibly can have. So again, that's the area we're seeing rapid growth
Yeah. There's also an area, Mike, that I want you to comment on real quick, high level. Again, the electrification of transportation is probably the most significant, impactful trend led by Tesla, but really all the car companies, GM, Volvo, Ford, have announced products, and they're all obviously needing to connect their vehicles. And so Intel has several assets in that space. What can you share about, turning the car into a computer? What's going on there that was not going on a year or 2 years ago?
Well, the self-driving component, I think, is advanced. I can't talk much to that because that's not really my area of expertise. I think that's one thing as Intel as a company we've seen, and we made a big acquisition in that space with Mobileye a couple of years ago, and that investment is paying off very well for the company in terms of our moving into that area. The area where my team in particular is seeing a lot of activity is in the retail space, where retailers getting into EV charging as a service and thinking through, and this is level 3 fast charging, not levels 1 and 2, but thinking through the whole customer experience from today, you pull in 2 to 3 minutes, you're filled up, you can get your receipt or not, and then you're gone, to the new experience being 10 to 15 minutes. What does the retail experience look like? So a lot of work being done in that area, as well as in the payment solution. So we can talk all day long about all the technology goes into fast charger, all the technology goes into wireless charging, all the power quality issues you need to have on site, all the backup power. But the real challenge is the payment model. And I know this is an area you've been involved in for a while. How do you charge somebody that charged up at CPS and then came to Austin Energy and charged up, and then it was in Encore's territory? How do you reconcile all that? So I think the race is to that payment platform, and driving that payment platform along with, fast charging, ubiquitous fast charging. I think those two areas are going to help move this faster. And I mean, don't ask me to say percentage and how many EVs are going to hit the market. No one really knows. I don't think anyone could pick that one out, but we are definitely seeing a lot of traction on the service side of EV charging.
Yeah. John, you have a question?
Yeah, Mike, it's very interesting, and this relates to some of my research I'm doing. I'm looking at research on the movement of wealth from big cities to the small towns. What fascinates me is what amount of energy, let's combine what you do with energy. What amount of money are we spending for our energy when every company goes to a platform? There are servers, there will be servers everywhere. So certainly EVs are coming and other things are coming, but to guide this, we need servers and they need electricity. We haven't talked much about that on this program, but my question is, what do you think is the relationship between the amount of money that we will spend on energy just to maintain the servers and moving forward? Is it 20%? To me, the energy stuff is the new trees of England, or the animals in England. When there were no more trees, then you moved on to somewhere else. So what are we doing to think about keeping everything backed up? Are we spending 20% of our energy on servers? That's what they call it, the cloud now. Excuse me. Dumb computers. So what do you think about that relationship? I think it's coming, and I think it's going to be significant. Everybody's going to a platform. Everybody thinks the cloud is floating around, but actually, cloud is sitting in a big building in Boston or even in Austin. What do you think about how much money are we spending, Andreas and Bill and Mike, on just energy to maintain the computer?
Yeah, you're onto something there for sure. And I can't quote the numbers, but the growth in energy uses at data centers is exponential. And part of it is because the growth in data and cloud, but I think the other part is the growth of cloud at the edge. Maybe you call it fog. It's like low-hanging cloud. But especially in this industry, the industry I look after, where low latency, time-sensitive type workloads are going to need to be supported. If you can imagine, like, we're moving to distributed energy world, and the loads are very intermittent in nature. And we have to use compute and AI to make those distributed loads look and act like base load. And until you do that, you're never going to get rid of base load. So the compute power needed to do that is going to drive energy usage. You're exactly right. All companies are looking at, especially companies like ours, on how do you make, first of all, more efficient data centers, but also through immersion cooling, maybe strategic cooling around different workloads. But the other area we're working on is around something I'll call carbon aware compute, where workloads at that data center are run in accordance to the availability of clean renewable energy. And then workloads can be shifted when dirtier power, for example, is being used, and maybe dirtier power is the last power that you have to buy. So I think that the industry is looking at it. I think it ends up becoming as well a competitive situation between data center technology companies. And I think the cost of the energy and the carbon footprint of a data center is going to start being priced into proposals, and companies are looking at that, not only at the carbon footprint of a data center, but their own carbon footprint and how they're reporting their own. So if they're buying from a supply chain that has a high carbon footprint, they have to report that themselves as part of their own carbon. So they're looking very closely now at companies to address that issue you just talked about.
Yeah, one follow-up. And
let me add some more color to Mike's great answer. So Johnny, the numbers are actually staggering and growing very fast. And in fact, the big battle on the chip business, while a lot of people are focused on the edge, and the edge is very important as we go from 100, 10 billion things worldwide to 300 billion things. Lots of chips are going to go into that, but the number of chips in the high-end chips that are going to go into, a 10x, 100x growth of data centers is phenomenal. And this is where, a lot of people make all kinds of hooplas about our transformation. And I think Intel is sitting on the best position possible because they control that space more than anybody else. But just historically, 5 years ago, all the data centers together in the United States consumed the same amount of energy that the state of Tennessee. That has grown now to equivalent to the state of Illinois. And the prediction is that within the next 30 years, as we get to a zero carbon reality with electric vehicles, that the consumption of data centers in the US will equal the consumption of California. So it is growing very, very, very fast. And clearly, as compute on the edge proliferates, it's almost unstoppable what's going to happen, this revolution. And then we have talked a little bit about the amount of energy that is missing that needs to be produced to actually provide energy for all the vehicles that could become electric, which is staggering. So, great question. The numbers are significantly huge, growing very fast.
Okay, I see, Mike, I see a collision between companies like yours and the grid itself. So when you say, it's got to be, let's just say it's got to be automated. We still have people who are pulling levers, in the grid, like it was, 1929 technology. So what I see is a collision within the technologies of companies like yours and the reality of the 1929 technology that the grid is running on. So when you talk about the automation process, when you talk about what's happening at the edge and switching electricity around and knowing exactly where it is, my understanding is that, as someone who does tech transfer, we're just not there yet. So that was a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And I can share with the audience that one of the most exciting projects that we are looking forward to launching is actually a project idea that came from Mike Bates about the digital substation of the future, which has gotten tons of legs over the last 7 months at Texas State and with CIEDAR. And so we think that before the year is out, we will be launching that project with all kinds of companies to basically figure out how the power industry can go to a self-healing, 100% automated reality.
Llewelyn, I'd like to bring in some things here. The big omissions from this conversation seems to me are the utilities don't yet seem to be desperate to increase their generation. they're desperate to go to green generation, to green power, but pure more megawatts. I don't see that. And when Tom Kuhn, the head of the Edison Electric Institute, testified on Wall Street, he had difficulty in explaining growth in the future because they were looking at steady to declining growth because of efficiency. And then there was a 5.6% hit with the pandemic in electric demand. So the sense of urgency about future generation has not yet been felt in the utility industry that I cover and the utilities that I talk to. I also wonder why we don't hear more about nuclear power, which will deal with a lot of this central generation, this bridging between that and a lot of distributed generation with its very complex hookups and collection. I think definitely we're going to see it. It's coming. And I wonder, for a question for Mike, it may be outside of his area of immediate expertise, but where he works, it's of some interest. What about the future of Taiwan, and what is that going to do to your company if China invades?
Wow, that's a curveball for sure, and an area that I really don't have.
But you must talk about it around the water cooler, as it were.
Well, I'm not around the water cooler anymore. My water cooler is right behind me in the sink, so I don't get the.
This is what I was referring to earlier, the lack of communication.
Exactly.
When we don't go to the office. Try to get back to the office in the water cooler and find out what's going on.
No, exactly. So I know, obviously it's an important topic. One of that's a big ecosystem for us in Taiwan. In terms of the situation, I just not that close to it. Although I can tell you this, my nephew is on the destroyer that was sent over there. I forgot the name of it now. Can't believe I forgot it. But from that perspective, I'm personally involved and concerned about it. From a business perspective, I think a lot of it's been talked about securing America's supply of technology and ensuring we've got manufacturing here on our own soil. I know our biggest competitor, TSMC, is building a plant in Arizona to help, presumably, to ensure supply. And I know the Biden administration this is an important topic for their administration. So I think one approach, obviously, is to ensure our supply so that Taiwan doesn't become such a wild card for us.
Yeah.
Back to my other part of my question, which is, Andres, for example, talks about this coming new electric load, and yet the government, the Biden administration, is looking for clean power, and yet seems to have remarkable equanimity about the closure of nuclear power plants for rather trivial economic reasons, the balance in the spot market being against nuclear. This seems to me like an incredible blind spot as we go forging ahead. We're looking at diversified generation, which of course includes a much more complex and suspect supply line, including rare earths, chips, etc., that do not affect nuclear power plants nearly as much, and yet somehow they're not being added into this conversation with the enthusiasm I thought they might be, and which I think they deserve to get.
So let me propose something. If you own centralized generation, regardless of the source, coal, gas, nuclear, and you see that the market is moving towards a distributed energy system, then your asset that you own, if that all does become true, which I think I would say the toothpaste is out of the tube, we're not going back to centralized generation, then those assets become less valuable. And possibly that is a reason why those energy sources are not, they're not being invested in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me put it another way. There's a
strategic issue for the country, though, going forward, that
Right.
we are depending more and more on supply lines that are fragile and overlooking supply lines that are relatively concrete.
Yeah, you make a good point.
I mean, there's a parallel competitive strategy going on with China and America with 5G and what the Chinese are doing through central planning. And it is very, very interesting. So if you look at 5G, if you look at smart cities there, if you look at just building cities when there's nobody there, if you look at all of the things that's happening, if you look at all the research, get your comment on this, Mike, of chips being made now from wood. There's so much in your future that could be very exciting that will allow you to float along and to be very, very competitive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I want to make a comment to enhance the point that Llewelyn is making, which utilities are being very cautious. The Exelon CEO 2 weeks ago was an interview, or he testified at the PUC in Illinois, and they're discussing their generation plans for the future. And he said that to the PUC there that replacing nuclear with renewables and storage to meet the carbon goals of Illinois would cost $80 billion. That doesn't sound like a smart thing to do, but I don't know. I mean, we seem to be in a rush now. I wanted to ask you something, Mike, that I think is interesting. You probably has a good perspective. The Biden administration has come in, and we have now the infrastructure bill, and not sure what's going to be approved, but there's roughly a chunk of money in there, 170 billion for EVs, 10 billion for conservative jobs, 200 billion for research and development, 100 billion for the smart grid. What are your thoughts of what are you hearing? Again, you guys, have unique conversations with a lot of people. What's your sense of, are you optimistic about the business and the transformation 6 months from now, or what do you think where it's heading?
I have a very bullish view on the transition on all of those fronts that you just mentioned. Part of it will be because of the favorable administration, not just from the investment side, but also from the legislation and policy side and the influencing in the policy side. But I'll go back to something I alluded to earlier. I was actually, this is a conference maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and you maybe even been there, Andreas. It was a Distributech actually. And it was one of the meetings, and someone asked the question, is this a revolution or evolution? And the people that answered evolution, it was mostly 90% of the audience, mostly utilities. Oh, it's an evolution, not flippantly, but yeah, we're driving it, it's under our terms, we're gonna work it out, it's all gonna happen. And then 10% maybe were revolution. And of course, I was like raising my hand as fast, as hard as I could. It's a revolution, guys, wake up, come on. So I think today it's flipped. And it's not because they just woke up one day and said, oh, wow, that's the wrong answer. It's because the market is saying, we're moving. You better come along. If you don't come along, you're going to get disintermediated. So I think the utilities have an opportunity now, and maybe they're starting to see they have an opportunity for the grid to be a platform for delivery of services and new revenues that they weren't seeing before. So you go back to, and I guess everybody on this call is old enough to remember the telecommunications restructuring and competition. It wasn't the Southwestern Bells of the world that made the money on all that infrastructure they built. It was the Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of the world that took all that great infrastructure and made profits, made the kind of profits. Same scenario set up here. A regulated, highly regulated industry is moving into a more competitive environment. How do they react? Do they react in a way that allows them to intercept all the upside, or do they try to stick their feet in the ground and hold their position and hope that regulation and policy helps them to defend their turf? And I think that view is starting to go away, and more into this is driving, and we got to get on board.
Yeah, it seems, for example, just to show a sense of the changes, right? Duke Energy is a powerhouse company. Everybody loves them. They have great dividends, very well run company. But Duke Energy right now is under attack in two fronts. It's under attack by activist investors who want to break up the company into three companies, and it's under attack in North Carolina by a bunch of pro-deregulation market activists that are basically wanting to end the vertically integrated monopoly and bring retail competition into it. Do you see, Mike, do you hear sort of the model of ERCOT? Is this model with reps and all that, is this getting adopted everywhere? What's your sense of where that is?
On the policy side, I do feel like there's a lot more talk around deregulation, and it isn't like, hey, let's take what they did in ERCOT and learn from ERCOT and do it ourselves. It's more a reaction to the market, like Shell New Energy going into California and becoming, by all practical purposes, an energy retailer in a market that's deregulated, that's somewhat regulated. Does that move California into more of a open competition? So who knows what Amazon's going to do in this space? I don't know, and I'm not here to say what they're going to do, but what if they decide to get into this space, and are they going to be stopped by the old archaic rules about what you can and can't sell? Think about the EV charging piece that I just talked about. If you in Texas and other markets, if you're reselling energy off of a battery, you're considered a supplier. In some markets, you can't do that. Only the utility can do that. So those are the kind of things I think are going to bust it up as these new product companies, new service companies come in and really start pushing that envelope.
Yeah, Llewelyn?
Well, I think that's right, Mike. I think there will be people pushing the envelope, but there also is history, and the history of deregulation in the 1990s was not very good. It was driven very largely by one company, Enron, which drove it very hard. They thought you could treat electricity as though it were a very common commodity, and that you could trade everything, and that if we broke up the monopolies, and there was a lot of I was much involved in talking and writing about it at that time. There was a lot of belief that a new day was dawning. What actually happened was we found that people hankered for the old, responsible, integrated utility. We found that the new utilities could not afford some things the old ones could. What is one of the most innovative companies today? It's the Southern Company. Why? Because it's a regulated company and it can do things in the rate base, and the others do not have that option. And a totally unanticipated consequence of the disaggregation was the cost of money to the disaggregated went up because there was risk. They could fail, something unknown in the utility market. But when it came down to actual delivery of choice at the consumer level, particularly the individual retail consumer, it had very little effect. The furthest, and there was Pat Wood who designed ERCOT and the setup in Texas, and a very brilliant regulator. And I talked to him quite extensively after the deep freeze, and he said that we failed. It failed. There was something wrong there. I think you've got to look at electricity because of its nature, because you need it 24/7, and see that it is not treated totally as say a candy in a drugstore, which it doesn't matter if it's delivered or not. It matters a hell of a lot whether electricity is delivered. And we're doing two rather strange things. We're going to disaggregated generation, which is going to increase the risk, and we're looking for more resilience, which is vital for this new, totally electrified, connected world. And these two are in some collision. So my thought is there's going to be a new appreciation of things like nuclear with steady state production. If you want to get hydrogen, you need huge surpluses of electricity. If the temperatures you're working at are fairly low, you need even more. One of the ways of using surplus green power is to turn it into hydrogen, but you need something to back it up. You can't sort of make hydrogen today and not make it tomorrow. That's not an economic model. And then you're going to have to deploy that hydrogen to make further. You're setting up some kind of perpetual motion. You need some good, solid, dependable as it were, if it's like a dividend that you can rely on. And that comes from central station. One day it may not. But my suspicion is we go through these almost social upheavals, aggregation, disaggregation, and look at what we're seeing now. We're seeing, what are the great aggregators today? We mentioned some of them. The new tech companies are massive aggregators. They're buying everything. They're moving into every sphere. And that'll work for a while, but when they when they turn from being inventors to rent takers, there'll be a move to disaggregate them and break them up. It's part of the system. It's part of the, we make silent movies and then some clown invents talkies, and it doesn't matter how good the silent movie is, nobody goes to it.
Yeah. Let me pause, Johnny, real quick, 30 seconds to make my typical advertisement of our, hopefully you can see my screen now. The Digital 360 Summit is coming August 31st through September 2nd. We are expecting a phenomenal event, 100 speakers plus. The three of you will be speaking, I'm hoping. We all see each other there. It's going to be face-to-face. This is last year's companies that participated. Thank you again, the three of you, for speaking last year. And then I want to say thank you to Texas State University for sponsoring our Digital-Roundtable. Johnny, you had a question.
Yes, Mike said something very profound. He said, look, with the telecommunications, who make the money? So we saw Apple, for example, go from an iPod to the iPhone to everything else. Can you imagine utilities getting involved in a public-private relationship with their own telephones, with their own iPods, all those things? Because Mike asked the question, why should the private companies have all of the fun? And in an interesting kind of way, they are a partnership with, whether it's the military, with the government, and et cetera. So if you can imagine with me a future, and Andreas and I have talked about business models, and I'm kind of writing this stuff up, and I'll release it now. Can you imagine that if Google wants to get into the electric business, or if Microsoft wants to get into the electric business, then the utilities do their own telephone, they do their own computers. And why? They have connectivity in all homes. So the business models have always been mixed up by technologies. But you have to have a bold step to say the following. And remember, in an interesting strategic kind of way, this is what China is. China's instruments, whether it's cell phone or whatever have you, is a partnership with the government. Now, can you imagine all of a sudden, Austin Energy gets with all of the other energy companies and says, we will release our own gadget, our own telephone, our own computers, and all the services associated with that. Now, one might say, well, what about the new technology? It's a stagnant industry. Well, this will make it move, because they would have to hire other people to do what the system is not doing now in terms of a new business models. Now, you have to be bold in how you think about how technologies bring things together. So insurance companies now are financial institutions, right? Because of the whole idea of you have platforms now and you just need money. So what do you think about all of a sudden the business model of the utilities changing and start to compete with the Apples of the world? What a concept.
It is an interesting concept, and I think it goes back to what Llewelyn a little bit was talking about. Is this still a commodity business, and part of the commodity is reliability, or is this becoming a service business where the commodity, like your cell phone bill, it's served and it's sold to you in a service package. You don't even think about the minutes anymore. Used to be, oh, it was the minutes. How many minutes did you use, and did you use them this time? That's gone away in the conversation today. Now it's just packaged in a service. And do the utilities have the opportunity to extend their brand through technology and services? Absolutely. The devices may not be a phone, maybe an app on a phone, but it could be a solar inverter. It could be a battery. It could be a car. They could get in the EV leasing business and use the car as a battery first, and then moving people around second. So 100% agree with you. Devices may not be the same devices, but sure.
Absolutely.
I'd
So
like
we
to
gotta be
just say
bold.
that
Gotta be bold. Yes, go ahead.
at the end of deregulation, there were utilities that thought they would get into all these fields, and yet culturally they seemed to be unable to get the plug out of the wall. I remember what was it, Pinnacle tried to make housing for computers, God knows why. Another one tried to get into the trucking business. They all went overseas and bought different things. I remember being up on Wall Street, and one of the managing directors of one of the investment houses said to me, Llewelyn, will it help if we take their passports away? They were rushing out and buying this and buying that, but they had very little idea of the culture you would need to be entrepreneurial. The people who had the entrepreneurial culture were Enron, and they had too much of it, and it got to them. They became victims of this crazy culture. But the utilities have been really remarkably good, whether investor-owned or company-owned, but they were not very good at pulling cable for other people. They did not do a good job of putting in optic fiber. Everybody said, well, they've got optic fiber. Why don't they do? They know how to pull wire. They can do this. They've got that expertise. But in reality, they didn't have. And when they did it, most of that wire's black anyway. It never was used.
Yeah.
They were pretty disastrous. And they get punished by their stockholders who have bought their stock for a specific purpose, reliability, economic resilience, if you will. They do not want them going out and being entrepreneurs. You have a new culture that came with the internet, and that culture is, is where, unfortunately, you don't get these adaptations. The newspapers did not become the broadcasters and have not become the internet companies. Old cultures tend to die and new ones to replace them, not old ones to adopt. In fact, the history of them adopting is very low. In a logical world, if you would say aircraft would have been made by the car companies. They had engines, they had sheet metal, they had engineering, they had economic resources. They made some, but it wasn't what to be the future. It took new companies to make airplanes. It has taken new companies to bring us the telephone revolution, and it is new companies that have brought us the computer revolution, and they will age, get sclerosis, and have to be replaced.
I want to take us back to a specific point that I want your feedback on, because it should accelerate the business. It is my take that, the revolution of digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization is accelerating thanks to COVID. However, it should be farther accelerating because we seem to continue to not only need to automate everything, but do it better and better and better. So the colonial pipeline hacking and the shutdown in Virginia of having power and whatever, what's your take on what's happening? You guys have a ton of security products. It's everybody trying to instrument everything like never before? What's going on?
So
first thing, you've got way too many government departments trying to solve the problem. You've got about 10 places in the federal government that think they are in charge of the problem. You have an evolving challenge, and it will be met, but it will be met incrementally, not with some magic thing. John Savage at Brown University, who I talk with quite a lot, a friend of mine who's head of their computer sciences, he says, think of rather in terms of bank robbers. We haven't solved bank robbery, but there are not that many anymore because the technology is better vaults, better surveillance, better.
I want to hear from Mike Llewelyn.
Sure.
Yeah, so when you think about this, so first of all, you're right. We're introducing, millions of new access and data points on the system up and down, not just in oil and gas, upstream, midstream, downstream, but electric as well, which does bring a new challenge on security. And it's not just cybersecurity, it's physical security as well. So do we have to do the same kind of surveillance and security that you have at a substation now at utility scale solar farm or at a big commercial users like in Austin, like at an AMD? Do you have to have, surveillance there? So there's a physical security component aspect of this that I think is needed, that is being addressed. But I think the bigger issue is the part you just talked about, onboarding new devices. And I think what you also mentioned earlier about this kind of substation platform approach, that's one of the ways that we're starting to see, one, the security risk being addressed, but also making things more secure than they were before, even though we're adding more devices. So the structure of the platform at the edge that allows you to containerize the different workloads, which also then allows you to containerize the security around those workloads, makes it, I'm not going to say locked down, but is that platform approach, I think, that is adding to those additional cybersecurity, AI-enabled cybersecurity applications to run. I think that technology, thankfully, is at least ahead of where we're going. And obviously, that's the thing that we can't survive, would be some sort of a breakdown of the cybersecurity or of the security system to shut down and our electric system. Especially electric systems now run on distributed. And I don't know if you heard this or not, Andreas, but I heard back during the winter emergency that we were like 4 minutes away from an actual blackout.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, we had ERCOT here, and we talked about it, and it was fascinating. And to be honest with you, I want to say, just let me summarize something you are saying that is pretty profound here around security and the new architecture. So if I buy into this whole thing and I call Intel to help me re-architect my grid, re-architect my data centers and my networks and everything, I mean, you do have the wherewithal to help me out, right? If I'm a utility and I want to go serious about edge compute, you have the tools and the knowledge to help me re-architect the grid. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we work with you to software define your infrastructure.
Well, I think that's a critical thing, right? Because again, what I like about what you're saying is, and you can probably talk about maybe some of the clients that you work with very closely if you can. But it seems to be like there's almost today a bit of a digital divide of the companies that have bought into the revolution, that are really transforming their assets, like Austin Energy did a long time ago and continues to, and many others that you work with. But then there is a big gap. There's a bunch of companies, that Llewelyn interviews and everybody talks to, that they're on the fence, right? They're doing something, but they're on the fence. And it seems to be that if I were to buy into the Intel platform structure, architecture, cybersecurity paradigm, that 2 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe I can actually finally deliver the self-healing grid that John Butler wants, because John Butler is frustrated by the fact that the grid, as it is designed today, in spots and not homogeneously, all digitalized, all super secure, that is holding back the growth of the economy. So am I putting that correctly? Do you have any companies that you can talk about that you would call leading edge on the partnership with Intel on this?
Yeah. So first of all, I think John is right. We think the substation is the inflection point for a balanced, free-flowing, frictionless, two-way flow of energy, regardless of the source. So let the market decide the highest and best use energy source. And wherever it comes from, it should not matter. And we think instrumenting the substation, think micro servers in the substation, that allows you to consolidate all those workloads in real time to make those real-time decisions. And once you get there, now you're starting to deliver base load like load. And then to Llewelyn's point, that's when you start to reach parity with base load technologies. And I think that's, we're getting there. And some of the areas, so we have a public project, we have several projects going on. There's two in particular, both sides of the world. One is Tenaga Nasional in Malaysia. It's the Malaysian-owned utility that has deployed server class compute in their substations, consolidate the workloads. I could show you a picture if we had time, but you looked in the room, it was like 30 feet of electrical mechanical equipment replaced with 6 feet of servers. The operational savings, it is amazing. And that is actually going to be featured at a CIEDAR workshop in June coming up. We also have another project with Iberdrola in Spain. This is instrumenting the secondary substation in a way that allows them to monitor real-time loads. But I think in their particular case, then begin offer services around this new data. So it's those utilities, I think, that see the grid as a platform delivery of services. They're the ones that are really wanting to invest and move forward. And then maybe there's a group that's kind of a wait and see, and you know this industry, there's probably a lot of those. And then there's the others, not to name any, that got their head in the sand and they're going to stick their elbows out through the policy and try to keep it from happening.
Yeah, yeah. Any follow-up questions, guys? Johnny?
Well, no, but I think that was an extremely good and very worthwhile explanation of the automation of the electric system.
Yeah, and I think what's happening, I think what's important is that we're thinking about it. What's important that the head does not remain in the sand. That's what's important. And this is where you need to have visions about the relationship between technology, business models, wealth creation, job creation. And as you say, Llewelyn, everything will turn sour and companies will live when they die. And they will die. So it's important to have conversations. It's important to have conferences. It's important to look not just at the technologies, but also at the business models.
Yeah, but Mike, you know, we track all these digital transformation buckets here, smart energy, and we've been talking about it. We talk about smart buildings, which is a user of that smart energy. We talk about, you know, transportation. We talk about smart cities. We talk about telecom. It seems to be that, you know, you guys are driving this wedge of transformation in a revolution fashion by integrating the cloud, your server technology, compute, artificial intelligence, and then communications. And I would imagine that you would agree with me, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it, that you know, real-time controls, broadband, the ability to touch every device in a real-time manner like you would with fiber anywhere on that infrastructure is critical. So what are your thoughts on how does 5G help this revolution to accelerate?
Great question. And we're really starting to see traction. I know this is one of your areas of expertise, Andres, and all the time work you've been on the utility telecommunications committees, and you've seen this. Well, you and I, that's our relationship started with a broadband over power line demonstration in Austin Energy that was part of a UTC conference. I can't remember what year that was. We had thermostats running on it. It was amazing. Had a battery backup. It was way too early, and I think both of us have some wounds on our back to prove it. But to your point earlier, these are time-sensitive loads, especially as we move into more intermittent supply, which also requires low latency compute. So I think 5G, ubiquitous 5G, especially out to these distributed loads, delivering low latency decision-making is going to help advance 5G in this industry, no doubt about it. And I don't know what happened, but the last 6 months, the conversation between utilities and the 5G providers, especially those that can provide kind of private LTE, private 5G networks, is really taking off.
Yeah, are you working with Enterics at all? Are you guys members or partners with them at all? They seem to be getting a lot of traction, and we at Texas State actually have become a test bed for all the technologies and their capabilities, and you know, Amarin and Excel and Exelon and a bunch of utilities have signed up agreements with them.
Yeah,
I think we are. I'll double check that and confirm. If not, I'll definitely.
I believe their network, I've done some work with them, and their network, they're using LTE though, not 5G.
Correct, but it'll be upgradable to 5G.
Yeah.
Johnny, before we close here, and we gotta go, unfortunately, Mike, but this CNBC Disruptor 50 has been going on for 9 years. John Sibley Butler is one of the few judges. There's like 6 judges or something like that. It's amazing what's going on. Tons of companies on fintech, new business models, Robinhood, Stripe, Nubank, Chime, Ripple, Brex, Patron, Magenta, Checkout.com, Tala, Father Wave, all kinds of companies on the food supply chain, making things better, easier, food plants to replace meat, Impossible Foods, Lineage Logistics, Eat Dust, Indig AG, Appeal, all kinds of things on telecare, all kinds of things on supply chain, distribution, things like Flock Freight, Convoy, GoPuff, delivery, real-time delivery companies, all getting funded. John, what is going on? I get a sense that we keep talking that the world's falling, sky's falling on the healthcare side of the equation, but innovation is thriving.
It is thriving. I'm a part of CNBC, and billions of dollars are going into the future. That is what we have learned, and what George Kosmeski taught, and we taught when I was director of IC Square, and of course I have books on tech transfer, is that within the context, you need to understand what's going on in the laboratory. Intel needs to understand. My company that I did with Alan Blake was Glowfish. It came from the laboratory. What disturbs and creates the future is what happens in the laboratory. So if you look at all the CNBC companies that we looked at, you're exactly right. And by the way, we're talking about billions of dollars being invested. We're talking about companies people have never seen before. So what's going on here is that there is a segment in the investor sector in America that understand how to create jobs in the future and how to create new companies. And let me tell you what, I looked at a company now where if you want your own Google, you can just write the code for it, and it's just like an old SPS code, right? And all of the relationship between how we get stuff, whether it's by Uber that's flying, the supply chain, it will change tremendously. Remember, Urquhart said, excuse me, the woman who was flying around the world said, you guys here in the, you big executives in the train industry, I can tell you what, in a few years, everybody would fly coast to coast, and they laughed at her, right? So I get a chance to look at and to think about the new technologies and the business world. And what's great about Austin, Texas now, there's so much wealth moving to Austin. And we have these sessions on, hey, what should you invest in? And Andre and my colleagues, it is billions. It's not 100, it's not 100 million. It is billions. I mean, there are unicorns that you have never heard of before. That's and right. So we launched them last night. And it's like when we did Austin with George Kosmeski, nobody knew what we were doing. People would say, what are you doing? Well, business, Kosmeski would say, starts with science. It does not start with the management and accounting and finance. You got to get the engineers involved. You have to get those people involved. You do the technology. And let me tell you what, it is absolutely amazing, as you can see, as you saw this night.
Well, clearly all these companies are all based in the cloud, all doing AI, focus on different market segments. So Intel chips are going through the fabs at a faster pace than they ever thought possible. I understand if you guys are building 3 or 4 new fabs at the tune of $20-30 billion, and there are shortages of chips everywhere. So what a great time to be in the chip making business. Mike, thank you for having us. Any parting thoughts about our conversation today, and what can Intel do for us, and what can we expect in the next few months from you?
I just really appreciate the time. It was a great conversation, really open conversation. I do think we're at a really cool inflection point. I agree, not just in digital transformation, but in particularly business model transformation, as we've been talking about. This is something that I know you and I have been thinking about for a while. We've been hammering away at it for a while, and we've always thought, hey, maybe it's now the time, but I really do think it's happening. It's the best time to be in this space. I'm super grateful to be at a company like Intel with the convening power of the ecosystem that they have. It's almost like a kid in a candy shop. So super happy to be here today, and would love to come back again, maybe into the year or another time, just to kind of
Absolutely.
reflect on what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here today, Mike. Thank you very
You bet.
much.
Y'all have a great day.
Fascinating, Mike. Fascinating. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Johnny, take us away.
Yeah, and you know, I bite my tongue as a guy who played in the LSU band for 4 years.
Uh-oh.
Goodbye to Texas University. So long
to the old
and it's good luck to the dear old Texas Aggies. They are the ones who show the real old fight. The eyes of Texas are upon you. That is the song they sing so well.
Sounds like hell.
Goodbye to Texas University. We gonna beat
Real stuff, Texas A&M.
Mike, I want you to know I know that song because when I was in the LSU band, they said, "What song do you hate the most in the conference that you play?" So I thought I would honor you with the.
I really do appreciate it, man.
him as a Longhorn myself and as an undergraduate.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Thanks a lot, man. Take care.